I'll just welcome everyone that's here. I think we'll give it a few more minutes yet, just to see if, anybody else is logging in yet. I know sometimes you go to log in and it requires you to download a new version of Zoom or something like that if you haven't used it in a while. So we'll give everyone a few minutes yet. We did
That
have
happened to me yesterday.
Yep. And we did have 40 people register. So that's why I want to just give it a few more minutes in case they're trying to get in yet. So just bear with us, everybody. Give it one more minute here and then we'll get things kicked off. All right. Well, it's 12:03, so I think we're good to get started. Just I want to welcome everybody here. This is the NAMA monthly webinar series. This one focuses on facility design. And hopefully you can all see our screen that we're sharing here. If you're having any issues, just post that in chat. So presenting today will be myself, Ken Miller. I'm the current NAMA board president and the chair of the communications committee for NAMA. I also serve as in my daily role is as the solid waste agency administrator for the Dubuque Metropolitan Area Solid Waste Agency, which is in Dubuque, Iowa. The city is pictured in my background behind me. And then I'll let Dave kind of introduce himself.
Yeah, David Nightingale, also board member with Ken, and I serve on the training committee and the policy committees. And my company is called Special Waste Associates, and we help communities in designing HHW, CESQG, VSQG, you pick your acronym type of business, non-household waste generator of hazardous materials. And been doing that for a few decades, and happy to be here today.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get into the presentation. Dave's handling the first part here. Dave, just let me know when you want me to advance the slides as we go through, and
Okay, so one of the sort of the things that historically struggle with, are we making a difference? Are we having an effective program? And it's still a question that a lot of people come up, especially decision makers, people that have programs. They want to know, well, am I doing an adequate job? Can I do better? What's the threshold? What should I go? What kind of goal should I aim for? So next slide, please. So just some ideas of some, ideas about performance. There's a community I chatted with a month or so ago, and they had 54,000 households, so not a big area. Pennsylvania, they have a 20-year history of curbside collection where they pay a contractor to go out and actually pick up household hazardous waste at a residence, and they pay the contractor $170 per pickup. So wherever it happens to be in their jurisdiction, they'll $170 is a flat rate. And so in 2021, last time they had all the statistics, they had served 556 households. So if you divide that number of households picked up by the total, It's about 1% of households per year. Another example from Colorado, a little larger community, 121,000 households. They've been doing collection events, which is a more typical thing, since '93. So again, decades worth of work. And they started doing once a year, but last most of the time since '93, after a couple of years, they've done 3 collection events per year. And in 2016, they did 2,650 households, about 2% of the households served per year in that community, which is, this is not unusual level of service for people doing collection events, or in the case of the Pennsylvania community, a pickup at the actual residence on a one-off basis. Thanks, Ken. Next slide. Some other ways to go about it is people that have collection facilities. I'll go ahead to the next slide and give some examples here, just in very brief. So Ramsey County, Minnesota, recently they had 13% of their households served per year. County in Florida, Sarasota, 11% households served per year. Orange County, California, 13.7. Thurston County, Washington State, 13.6. Johnson County, Kansas, 9%. And these are, not necessarily it goes up and down from year to year, but just get an idea of these are some more effective. Not all jurisdictions with facilities reach these levels, but typically you don't reach these double-digit figures unless you have a facility. Doing collection events, it's rare to see over maybe even 5%. So these guys are doing, 2 or 3 times the amount you'd expect to see at a collection event because they've got a facility. So relatively, you can be more effective in serving a community if you have a collection facility. So you have to have a budget, you have to have infrastructure. It's just not just a matter of saying, oh, I want to do it. There's some effort that goes into making that a reality. Next slide, please. So here's just a survey that was done of people that are around the country. Nobody's identified here, but this kind of breaks out between different population densities. And some people think, well, the big cities, they can do this stuff. They've got the resources, but a rural area, really, we don't have the capacity or what have you. And this kind of shows a lie to that. It's actually maybe the other way around. If you look at on the right-hand side, rural, and the population density as you go to the right is less and less and less. So in rural area, you've got about 4 people below 4% as far as the percent of households per year participating for jurisdictions below 4%, and about 4 above 6%. So they're and these are all facilities. So not necessarily going to be high performing, but about half of them are. If you look at the suburban area in the middle there, there's 4 that are above the 6% mark, and 3 that are below the 4% mark. So suburban, can about half and half. And the urban area, interestingly, if you take that one, it's about on the 4% line. There's 7 at or below 4%, and only 2 up in the higher reaches, above 10% actually in this case. And this is generally what my experience tells me, is that the urban areas are actually more difficult to get high levels of participation than it is in suburban or rural areas. So just because you don't have a big population doesn't mean you can't have an effective program. Next slide, please. So again, sort of doing a dichotomy between having a permanent facility and collection events. Go ahead, Ken. So here's an idea where this is in Sonoma, California, and up through the bars there from 1997 through 2004, the black bars or dark gray bars, that's when they were just doing collection events, and they were doing dozens of collection events per year. There's a large geographic area, a couple of highly populated areas, but a lot of small towns in the outlying area, sort of a mixed urban suburban area. And you can see they were, they never even got to 10,000 people. And then 2005 and later is when they opened their facility. And the gray bars show the participation of people going to the facility, one facility for the whole county. And they kept on doing collection events almost as many as they had before. And you see that dark gray or black bar at the bottom. The level of people going to collection events went way, way down. And this is just a really clear picture to me, and I've seen this in other jurisdictions too, but this one has one of the longest collection events and a longest time frame for having a facility. It shows this really clear dichotomy. A lot of times when people build a facility, they stop doing collection events altogether. In this case, they've kept on doing collection events, but you can see there's a huge preference for the public going to a collection event that's year-round and more available, even though it's actually not even in a town. You have to drive 15 or 20 minutes out of the main city even to get to this facility. It's not a terribly convenient location, but still people prefer it. Next slide, please. So, that's sort of anecdotal, a couple of different, cities and counties around the country. But, how would you measure yourself over time? How do you measure yourself to your neighbor? Say you're in a big city and you want to check how you're doing versus a suburban area next door, or you're in a rural county and you want to check out, well, what's your neighbor doing in a neighboring rural county? How do you compare from year to year as well as between your peers? Next slide, please. So let's develop a metric for trying to figure out what your collective effectiveness is, regardless of the size of your facility or whatever. And this came about from some work that I did with the Paint Product Stewardship Initiative before Paint Care was developed or anything like that. It was a national initiative by Product Stewardship Institute. And one of the things that we did was we looked at how old is the age of paint. And paint represents 40 to 60% of all your household hazardous materials typically. And we found, looking at hundreds of, actually, today, the reason you can actually tell how old the paint is the EPA, because of the Air Quality Act requires manufacturers of paint to actually have a date code stamped on every container, every gallon, every quart they sell of when it was manufactured. And so you can actually gauge how old the paint is by decoding that. And we went through this process of going to manufacturers. What's your code? Give us a decoder ring. And we went and we got from HHW collection operations in different counties and actually decoded the age of all these paint cans, hundreds of them. And we found the average age of the paint cans was 7.4 years. And being, half or more of the total household hazardous waste stream. We don't know the date for certain on anything else, but say, well, maybe when they're bringing the paint in, even if it's a loss leader, maybe that's the age of everything else too. Approximately, if you can take that leap of faith, then you can say, okay, well, approximately everything else is about that old too. And then you can then just say, okay, then we have something to base, because we know then the periodicity of generation of household hazardous waste at 7.4 years. And so you can then calculate if that's how often it's generated, then you can multiply that by the percent of participation per year to get an effectiveness. And so if you want to be 100% effective, that ends up calculating out to be about 13.5% annual participation is a metric of 100% effectiveness. Next slide, please. So just looking at other than just simply the participation level, there's other benefits to having a permanent facility when you have that higher level of performance. Next slide, please. So one is convenience, and that actually sort of is synergistic with the participation level, as we saw in Sonoma there, that once you actually make it a year-round availability, people will show up at the time when they need it. And so that results in a higher potential for your collection effectiveness. And of course, from the practical standpoint, you're reducing these chemicals from potential exposure in the home. If you had a home fire, these chemicals are not there anymore in the quantities they might have otherwise been. So firefighters are exposed to less volatilizing things blowing up or what have you. Also, more the classic view of things is people working in the waste world, solid waste, as well as wastewater systems, groundwater protection districts, what have you. The equipment, staff, and resources are protected from this material if it's being managed appropriately, as opposed to being dumped in the backyard or otherwise down the drain, where wastewater treatment plants aren't typically designed to treat synthetic chemical materials. So they often will pass right through. And then that gets to these NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits, that if you have a wastewater system that is discharging at too high a level, they have to do additional things, and you can protect the permit levels by eliminating some of these things from the sewer systems. It's also a lot of places they're looking to eliminate or reduce the level of liquids getting into the landfill, or there's some areas where it's just illegal to put it in to begin with. So different motivations, but they're all enhanced by having a permanent collection facility where you get a higher level of effectiveness. Next slide, please. So thinking about, what do you do when you said, okay, well, okay, we think we're going to bite the bullet. So what sort of things should we be looking for? What are sort of some of the key features, attributes, what have you, of a facility to collect and manage this stuff safely and efficiently? Next slide, please. So just going to go over 10 quick things that are things that sometimes people don't think about or they get wrong. One is smaller is not better, and that is there's an old book. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think. Schumacher, name of the book. Anyway, it's the opposite of that. So smaller is not better in this case, and that's because there's sort of a history of nobody knew how to do this 30 years ago. It was like, well, I don't know, let's just put something together and see what happens. And typically people built their facilities too small. It was probably working in this field since the mid 80s. It was probably 15 years before I saw a facility that the operator, after 12 months of operation, thought they had a big enough facility. Everybody said, oh, we built it too small. We built it too small. That was the mantra that everybody had in the early days. So if you're looking at your neighbor, their facility is 20 years old, don't think that's necessarily going to work for you. They're typically undersized. People are building much, much larger facilities in the second and even some places the third generations of facilities are being built. Also co-locate it with a wastewater treatment plant or a solid waste transfer station or landfill. There's synergies as far as cross-training staff, and if you're, for instance, with a fire department, they may have some hazmat people that can help, with certain materials that you may find, and then plan for future expansion. You should have, one area, even if you think you're building it big enough that you can expand. Who knows what the next, waste du jour you're going to be asked to manage? Is it going to be another e-waste type thing? Is it going to be mattresses? Who knows? But providing some space, at least in some adjacent or nearby area, to expand your operation. And natural light is often downplayed, and interestingly, architects are usually taught to consider natural lighting. It actually makes it for a more pleasant workspace, and also reduces your energy use. So your carbon footprint will go down a little bit if you can have windows, skylights, clear stories, translucent panels to let natural light into the work area, and also better lighting means you can see things better and have a safer operation as well. Local ventilation, it's very common to have bulking inflammable liquids like gasoline, turpentine, that sort of stuff into 50-gallon drums, and you need to have adequate ventilation, which is not a ceiling fan. It's actually a ventilation hood that takes it right at the point where it's being generated, and pretty high volume, because gasoline and acetone, that sort of stuff, is very volatile and will impact the worker and potentially have explosion hazard if you're not exhausting that stuff well. Also, when you're lab packing, you got particulate matters, dust and stuff. You don't want to have that in your breathing zone either, so good to have local ventilation there. And then, of course, if you're doing any kind of work with identifying unknowns, a lab hood would be another type of local spot ventilation. So those three types of local ventilation are key to having a healthful workspace and a safe workspace. A separate room for flammable liquids. This is largely driven by the building and the fire code, because typically shipping off, you'll have a few drums of flammable liquids, and it'll be over a maximum allowable quantity for the fire code to be in just a regular storage area. And you need to have, typically, to keep the cost down, you want a special room dedicated to that activity, where you have higher density of sprinkler flow and explosion proof wiring and other things that are more expensive, but keep that a safe area. But you don't have to do that throughout the whole facility, which was a really common thing people were doing. It's like, we're going to put explosion proof everything through the whole facility, and spending literally tens of thousands of dollars more than they needed to. And protect employees and waste from the weather, especially in a drive-through area. You want to have at least shade and protect from rain, snow blowing, that sort of stuff. So comfort of the employees as well as safety. You don't want to have sheets of ice that you're operating in. So to the extent that you can design your facility to shield that weather from impacting the work area where you're offloading is really a good idea. And then finally, reuse. If you're part of a solid waste system, typically you've got a waste hierarchy where reduce, reuse, recycle, and on down the line as far as the priorities in your waste management hierarchy. And so reuse is right near the top, and it's an easy thing to do, but not done well by many places. However, it can save double digits as far as your operating percentage savings by not having it go out in the truck to the hazardous waste site like everything else, because there's lots of good products that come into these facilities. So the extent that you can divert back into the community good products that are safe for people to use, it's a win-win. Your budget requirements go down, and your community sees you as a white hat as opposed to a black hat. Next.
And I believe this is where we tag it.
Yep, you're it.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Dave, for the first part. So I'm going to take over here and talk a little bit about project development. So this is kind of the why, where, and how. So first off, you kind of have to determine what your project goals are. Are they environmental goals? Is it based on customer demand? A lot of the qualifications and considerations that Dave just mentioned are what you need to take into account when you're looking to either build a new facility, build a facility for the first time, and determine how you're going to best manage that. I've got a couple pictures here too of one is the current facility that's at the landfill here in Dubuque. We are looking to replace that facility. As you can see, it's an aged facility, an older pole barn, has concrete floor and everything in it, has some collection, but doesn't have a lot of the characteristics that Dave just mentioned. There is not a lot of natural light other than the two doors, big doors on either end. So we rely a lot on the lighting inside the building, which can be very drab. And it is open air. So you do have some other considerations there with dust and everything else. So things that we would be looking to upgrade with a new facility. And also there is demand from the customers to have a more convenient drop off facility that is easier to access at our site. And so, because right now this is down a fairly steep hill from where our scale house is, the entrance to the landfill is. There is always concerns from residents with ingress and egress from the facility. So then kind of going to the where are we going and how are we going to get there? So one of the things that we have done, and we just are wrapping up, we did a request for proposals and qualifications. We sent that out to multiple engineering firms that we currently work with, posted it on our website, shared it on some other sites to gather interest in the project from consulting engineers to help us design the facility. We considered site location. site design, construction management are all the services that the engineering companies will be helping us with. Then we went through a vendor selection process, scored all the proposals. The picture here kind of illustrates the area that we've identified for the what we're calling our customer convenience center. It will include an HHM and electronics facility to accept those materials for recycling and diversion. Right now, or I should say not right now. It will be co-located in the still on our landfill site, but will have its own separate entrance from where all the heavy truck traffic enters the facility. It'll be down near our methane gas plant, where the methane gas goes to direct pipeline injection after it's cleaned. And so we'll utilize this space that you're seeing here on the map that's kind of looks somewhat graded on this map already. There's of course more work to do there yet, but that'll be the area where we build that facility. So when we were evaluating the proposals, we have a scoring matrix we use. We looked at the quality of the proposal, what their how integrated their proposal was. So how much of the work were they able to do themselves versus having to subcontract that out to other companies. Their past performance, if the proposer has worked for us in the past, is considered. So we looked at all those evaluation criteria before we looked at price, and the state actually requires us to score first based upon their qualifications, and price cannot be a consideration when scoring. So we did go through and evaluate all those proposals, and we'll be making a recommendation for vendor selection at our board meeting next week. So then what key resources will we provide the engineering company with as we look to design this building? As Dave said, we want to make sure there's a proper amount of space in the building to conduct these activities. And so some of the key resources we look at right now, since 2020, our facility has been on appointment only for the HHM and electronics collection. One of the advantages of that is the upfront data collection activities that occur for any of the customers attending there. I did kind of, when I grabbed the screenshot, of course, cut off the member or the names and stuff like that. I didn't feel that was relevant here, but it kind of shows you some of the information we do capture, what time they made their appointment for, their zip code, where they're coming from, whether or not they have electronics or household hazardous materials or both, or if they're a very small quantity generator. We also gather information on how they heard about the facility, so we can kind of gauge the effectiveness of some of our advertising we do for the facility. But that data will provide us with valuable data on not only how we will utilize this facility as a permanent collection facility, but also provides us, because of the zip code, areas where we'll still need to continue to focus on mobile collection. And one of the considerations for the facility is how this facility can better align with mobile collection and support mobile collection events more efficiently than our current facility does. And so we also have, of course, material specific data. All the material is weighed by our staff daily, and then also we weigh the full barrels to provide that information to our vendor that picks up the materials. But we're tracking that for daily and just overall material volumes. So, and then we of course need to identify the time to gather all this data. So those are the considerations we made, are included, and we'll work with our selected vendor on when we get around, or as we ramp up here for designing the facility. We have a targeted goal to be at 90% design by the end of November. We are on a July through June budget cycle, and so we have money budgeted in our fiscal year 2024 budget, which starts on July 1st of this year, but we want to be able to amend include in the fiscal year 2025 budget any additional funding that may be identified to complete this customer convenience center project. So that's why we have a goal of having design at the 90% mark by November, so that we have an updated budget number and can reallocate additional resources if necessary. So to kind of summarize all that, the facility design process, while complex, can be managed effectively by identifying key resources. So what are some of those resources that are out there? If you have attended previous conferences, Dave has put on an HHW collection facility design. He's got the guide here, but he has done a facility design class. I took that in 2019 in Denver. It has been very influential in how we designed our RFQ as we were going out for that project, considering the amount of space that we would potentially need. The way that we evaluated and looked at that in the class was very beneficial in helping to understand, exactly how much space we would need, and the fact that, well, you could retrofit an existing facility, which is what happened with our current facility, that it is better to design a facility from the ground up specifically for this task. And so that, of course, is what we're looking at doing in our site. There's also the Household Hazardous Waste and VSQE Collection Operator and Training Manual, 3rd edition, which is out there. The first time that the new course was attended was last year at the conference in Florida, but that guide is available. There have been several trainings since then related to the 24-hour HAZWOPER course. And then Dave wrote the Chronicle of the HHW Corner the last, 3 years, I believe, Dave, for Waste Advantage magazine. And those articles are all contained in that Chronicle of the HHM Corner book. All of these will be available on the NAMA, or will be soon be available on the NAMA website. And you would be able to purchase those there.
It was 30 months, so two and a half
30
years.
months.
And
Okay.
so all the articles in this first 6 of them are actually about facility design. So it was sort of a supplement to the design guide.
Yeah. And so, we have all those resources available. And of course, so we just want to thank you for attending the webinar today. We'll open it up to questions now, but we do have our contact information here on the screen. Both our email addresses, phone numbers. Actually, if you scan that QR code, that links to LinkedIn, where you can message me on there. Would encourage everyone to follow NAMA on LinkedIn. If you're on there, it's under the North American Hazardous Materials Management Association. So if you had previously followed the NAMA group on LinkedIn, we have shut that down as we've transitioned to the business style page on LinkedIn. But if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and Dave and I will do our best to answer them. Like we have. Okay, looks like we have one question. What's your budget and how many square feet will you build? So we haven't determined size yet. For a budget number right now, for the project, we have $5,775,000 allocated for that facility, based upon, and we base that upon some that were built recently in the last 3 to 5 years, and then adjusted for inflation from there in this area. So that's kind of what our current budget is. We're expecting, though, that we'll have to raise that just because of what construction costs have done over the last 24 months. So I think we have a second question here. What are some of the challenges you have encountered with facility design, and how have you handled those? So Dave, you've been a little more intimately involved in those, so.
Yeah, that's, you know, which top 30 things you want me to talk about there. Um, you know, you know, part of the challenge currently is that, as Ken just mentioned, the cost of construction has just gone through the roof. I mean, when I started doing these kind of designs, we were talking about $200 a square foot as kind of a normal kind of range for building these things. Now we're talking about $500 a square foot. And it might be a bait a little bit, but I don't expect it to go down a lot going forward. So, you know, you can only build, you know, less than half the number of square footage you could for the same money, you know, 15 or 20 years ago. Of course, inflation has happened, but that's been a real big deal. Is just the cost of anything, building anything has been so expensive. I'd say, you know, outside of the budgetary constraints that people have, just working with the building and the fire code department people, they're the people that usually have a lot of concern about the hazardous materials there for good reason. I mean, if they're going to be responding to an emergency, a fire, or you know, an unknown chemical or something like that that may be you know, potentially reactive, you know, they want to know what the magnitude of the materials on site are going to be. And so, and there's some very specific things because of the flammable liquids, as I mentioned before, that you have to do to meet the code. I guess one of the other things is a little bit of a more of a minor waste stream, but it can be very tricky, is any kind of fireworks or small caliber ammunition. A lot of folks just say, we're not just going to take it, but it's possible to meet code requirements, but it goes beyond the fire code and goes into the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives federal agency, and meeting some of their requirements for explosive magazines and that sort of stuff. And I've been doing some work on that regarding marine flares, some local jurisdictions, which they fall into that category with the explosives, and you know, they want to have a program, and how can they actually do that and meet all the requirements, the ATF as well as the building and everything. So all kinds of challenges. Those are sort of ones that pique my keep me up at night, I guess. Maybe that's the way to put it.
I would say for us, one of the challenges that I've kind of identified as we've gone through the request for proposal process from engineers, we required them to submit a list of facilities that they had designed for other clients. And then during that process, you know, evaluating the proposals, thanks to the advantages of Google Earth and other pictures that are readily available online, I virtually visited quite a few of those sites. And I would say that one challenge, being in a northern climate that I've identified, is that we will have to, you know, of course, invest more significantly in structures to do the activity that are enclosed, provide, you know, heating and, you know, some sort of ventilation during the summer months for the workers and stuff that are maybe not challenges in the southern regions of the country. A lot of the facilities I looked at, you know, they were able to do more of a pavilion style, where they've got them, you know, covered on top as far as some collections activities and stuff, and then moving them, of course, into storage facilities long term. But there are some definite differences there, and I would say that those add, of course, to our cost to construct, and one of the considered challenges that we'll encounter as we go through that. So it's just the fact that we, you know, there is more to have to build when you're in a northern climate. You got it. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, so Rachel had a follow-up about what's your advice if somebody wants to upgrade or retrofit an existing building. And it's I guess understanding some of the building code requirements going in to see how easy it's going to be to use that facility and meet the requirements. And I think, you know, maybe the facility guide could help if you read through that, you can kind of see some of the requirements based on what you're thinking about in your facility, to sort of get a context for, well, this is a facility that would work, but this other facility, is actually has these other features that, they have secondary containment built in because it was a facility that needed that for wash water or something like that.
Mhm.
And also, what's next to that facility? Is it 10 feet from, a school playground? The vicinity of what the facility is in,
Mhm.
an existing building can also be a real, red flag
Mm.
as far as going forward. So it's not impossible. It can be done, and there's certain facilities that are much better than others.
Mhm.
But you have to kind of understand the context of what you're ultimately going to want to have to meet code and operational requirements.
Yeah, that was one of the considerations. So the facility that we currently operate out of has been retrofitted a few times over the years. Most recent retrofits came about 7 or 8 years ago. And I would say one of the challenges with retrofitting the facility was meeting those code requirements. In Iowa, they all drop off has to happen in a covered area for both electronics and the HHM. Due to the logistics and the current site for the facility, we weren't able to construct an awning on the front of it and then still properly move traffic around. So we did have to have all drop off occur by driving through the building from one end to the other, which eats up a significant amount of the real estate inside the building for the drive-through activity to occur. And so I would say that's one of the challenges too, is not only for the building itself, but what's around the building and how are you able to meet those requirements in that manner. We also had to do some containment considerations and work through some containment concerns with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, who oversees collection operations from a regulatory standpoint in Iowa. We had to, construct some foam barriers and curbing and stuff like that that would allow, in case anything there failed, and everything. So there are a number of things. There are ways, of course, to mitigate those concerns, but they do pose challenges as you're going through it. And yeah. Looks like we have another question here, Dave. It says, my experience with local fire people is that they plan to just sit back and watch your building burn down and maybe prevent the fire from spreading.
Yeah, that's not uncommon. Once they see that, you've got that much flammable liquids in the building, they say, okay, we're not going to risk our personnel going in there. And so we're just going to be in a reactive mode and keep it from, unless it's just like a little, a 30-gallon tote or something like that, where they can actually manage it. If it's a fully involved facility, they're probably not going to try to put it out. And actually, I know one facility where it actually did burn to the ground. And one of the considerations and some of the things that the fire department let them did when they built it was not actually have as much fire protection as they would normally, but it was a building that was far removed. I mean, it was hundreds of yards from the next building, and so it was easy for them to just sit back and watch it and keep it safe from their perspective.
And I would say that's generally the response we've had from fire locally. Being co-located at the landfill, we have a pretty advanced fire plan for the entire site. Includes the landfill, the HHM collection facility, the other buildings on site, now the gas facility. Because of the, number of chemicals that are in there and the fact that, we're not maintaining, of course, a SDS database on every potential chemical that could be in there. So we, fire understands that it's generally everything from class 2 through 8 that could potentially be in there. That is kind of their general rule, is that they would just, protect the other assets in the area, but, the building would most likely be a total loss at this point. So
that one facility that burned down is the only one I know of. I don't know of any other HHW facility. I mean, there's hundreds of them out
Yeah.
there around the country and in Canada, and it's the only one. And they couldn't act, they never, the fire occurred when nobody was there. It was not being attended, and it was a secure site. So they don't know how it started. They never were able to figure that out. So it was kind of a mystery, probably some kind of chemical reaction of something they hadn't sorted through yet or something like that.
Okay, we have another one here. What are some maintenance tips for ensuring facilities last longer and optimize limited resources? Also, seems the best facilities only reach about 15% of the population. Is there a way to increase these numbers? And then lastly, is there an offset distance recommended for all facilities from water bodies?
A lot of questions. You want me to start?
Sure.
Okay. So one thing as far as maintenance that comes to mind is a wear area on the floor. If you've got, oftentimes people will they'll have a epoxy coated seal on the drive-through and maybe where your bulk inflammable liquids, and that gets a lot of wear and tear. And so having a color of the epoxy that's not the same as the concrete underneath, that way you can actually see when it's wearing through and when you need to do maintenance on it. So that's just one tip of common thing that it's an ongoing maintenance thing every few years, depending on the volume of stuff you have. You may need to freshen that up or replace the coating. 15%. So that kind of relates to the slide I had about 100% effectiveness is at 13.5%. So at the point when you're over 15% or better, the way to probably increase that is you're going to have people coming in more often than once every 7.4 years. And you can do that through people bringing smaller loads in more frequently, more advertising, that sort of stuff. If that's something you want to do, that certainly would be an increased level of service. But I guess I would ask, if it's not being generated more than that often, you're reducing the risk in the house, that sort of stuff. But is that cost effective for you to be doing? There's not a right answer to that question. It's kind of rhetorical, but that would be what I would wrestle with. Think about how often does it need to be taken out, and reducing the total amount and reducing that frequency so people are coming in more often than every 7 years. How does that benefit versus the cost of doing that? And I don't think there's an answer to that. It's just something to think about. At a certain distance from water bodies, it really depends on your state regulations, probably for waste facilities. In my state, there is no distance. You're supposed to not be in a flood zone, ideally, but outside of that, a distance from water body isn't often something that I see and have to worry about too much. Usually, these facilities are designed not to have anything ever go off-site. They're designed with secondary containment, so there's engineering controls built in that don't allow things to go off-site. So that's often will mitigate the need to be 500 yards or something from a lake or a stream or something like that. Ken?
Yeah, and I would also say, how do you reach a larger percentage of your population? You have to find a way to market the services to them where they're most likely to see it. And that's constantly changing. 15 years ago, you probably could have been really effective with a ad and say like the Sunday paper, because it still had a pretty high circulation rate. Now it's using multiple forms of communication. Social media can be very effective. Billboards, radio has become a challenge since so many people don't listen to local radio anymore and are using streaming apps. And a lot of them are using streaming apps where they pay extra to not have to listen to commercials. And so you really have to just kind of work through what seems to work best for your local community. As far as reaching out to the urban areas, one thing we'll look at for our facility, once the new facility is built and we get things squared away there operationally, will be for the urban areas, which traditionally, like Dave showed, have a lower participation rate, is do we start doing a curbside collection program run by us in those areas and starting there first, since we know that in the urban areas, one of the other challenges that we can identify through census data is access to transportation. And so, you know, even if we do an event, a mobile collection event at, say, here at our Public Works building, which is located in our most urban area of town, we still see a predominant amount of participation comes from the more suburban areas of our town and county. And so people who will actually be driving past our permanent collection facility to get to the mobile collection event that day. But and so what we've kind of identified is that, you know, if we really want to do outreach to that urban population, we're probably going to have to do curbside collection in order to overcome those transportation challenges. And of course, education will go with it too on why it's important to properly divert those items from the waste stream. Since residents aren't required to divert those items, it's voluntary. You know, it's making it as easy as possible for them to properly divert those items. So looks like we got another one here, Dave. Do you suggest putting flammable liquids in an outside shed?
Yeah, I can, I'll take
Yep.
that. So if you're building from the ground up, probably not. It makes more sense in new construction to integrate that flammable liquids area into part of your building as a separate room. If you're retrofitting that, you may have a situation where it makes sense to have an outside shed, typically a hazardous materials building. It's what you would have there. Those buildings are limited in they typically don't have spot ventilation that I talked about earlier when you're bulky flammable liquids. So you'd have to add in a specific custom ventilation hood, which isn't hard to do, but you just want to have that if you're going to be bulking liquids, flammable liquids outside in the shed. Also, just typically you're going to lose efficiencies because it's not going to be convenient to necessarily all the other waste streams that you're going to be storing inside the building. It's not in the outside shed. But if that's the only thing you have, for instance, if you only have outside sheds, then I guess that's maybe not what you're asking, but I'm not sure. But there's significant disadvantages of having the prefabricated hazardous materials, steel buildings just rolled in on a semi and putting out there. It's pretty easy, but it's not necessarily cost effective nor a effective operationally. So it might be, but it's very, very site specific.
And I would say, like, for us, one of the challenges with that, of course, is winter weather. So anytime we can keep everything inside one facility, it eliminates slip, fall hazards for employees and accidents with equipment moving heavier, items across and everything like that. So one of the reasons why we're looking at centralizing that inside the facility. And that's when that question, Dave, kind of dovetails to the next one, which is they bulk all their flammable liquids outside the building and are looking at upgrading to barrel vents in the area. The area is covered by a roof, but no sides. Any advice or suggestions? And I would hand that off to you.
Yeah, sure. So if the area is covered with a roof with no sides, so are you? So you're thinking of bringing it into that area as opposed to being outside. That's probably a good intermediary step. But if you have any significant winds, that will tend to defeat the ventilation barrel vent, as you're calling it here. So I would suggest if you're going to have an effective spot ventilation for your barrels or your drums, that it not be in the outside area at all. It would be inside area. I mean, a separate room within your building. That way, the ventilation you installed is going to be effective because it's not going to be overcome by the wind on a windy day.
All right. Next one here. Are there any more in-depth trainings coming up on this topic. How do we go about bringing a training to our state? There in Indiana, but in general, what types of costs are associated with the training? Dave, are we doing the facility design course this year or not?
I'm
At the
doing
conference.
there's I think we're calling it best practices, but it'll be
Okay.
a design element in that. It's I think a 4-hour training that I'll be doing down in Tempe in September,
Okay.
the
Okay.
national conference.
So there is one coming up in September at the conference in Tempe. As far as bringing it to your state or area in general, I would say, like for Indiana, that's part of our Great Lakes chapter. I would reach out to Matt Stevens about that, and it'd be something you could possibly survey the chapter, maybe include as part of a chapter workshop. The cost with that would, of course, if you're bringing someone like Dave in to teach the course, he'd have to provide a cost estimate for his travel and everything to put on the course. But that is definitely something that the chapters could look into. And if Great Lakes isn't in the position for that, I know the Heartland chapter, which makes up Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Nebraska, and Kansas, we're looking at having our chapter workshop in Illinois next year. And it could be a consideration there if there's enough interest in it. So typically when chapters are looking to host workshops like that, like for our chapter for the Heartland, we will send out feelers to the chapters that kind of surround us, like the North Central chapter, Great Lakes, and so on and so forth, to see if there's any interest there, and maybe attending one of those more regional chapter workshop events. So definitely some options, but please feel free to reach out to myself or Dave, and we can help connect you with those resources too, for both your chapter and for the training on a national level. So, and then the last one here, any advice for facilities operating in 40-foot containers?
Yeah, that's sort of a step back from what a purpose designed hazardous materials building would be. 40-foot. I imagine they're talking about that. I mean, the 40-foot is a standard sized shipping container. So it's one thing is that there's a step hazard or a ramp going up. So if you can countersink it so that you're at grade going in and out of the container, that would be helpful. One of my concerns would be, depending on what all you're doing in there, that you have adequate ventilation for either flammable liquid vapors and or the particulates from lab packing from the absorbent. That would be a concern. And also just simply having enough operating space within the container. One container, you're not going to get a lot of materials, the supplies, the stuff in the storage, the operating room, lab packing space, identification of things. There's a lot that goes into the operations of these, and in a 140-foot container would be tough. You need a number of them. There was a facility in Washington State that they operated that way for a number of years. That was their second generation, and then they're in their third generation, and I think they really need to be in the fourth generation because that's been 20-something years. But it's challenging, and there's safety and practical operating restrictions that are just come with that choice. And so it'd be nice to get beyond that, I would say.
All right. Well, it's 12:59. So we're near the end. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. Looks like Matt put some information into the chat also on a county program. So we want to thank everyone for being here today. Just really like to have these events and connect all the members from across the United States and any non-members who joined. And I'm willing to make our copy of our request for proposals, our scoring evaluation sheet available to anyone. So please feel free to reach out. You can email me at kmiller@citydubuque.org, or like I said, connect on LinkedIn. and I can get those resources over to you if you're looking to build a facility or at least want to see what that process has entailed as part of future planning. Please feel free to reach out to me. So,
Thank you, Ken.
all right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you next month at the webinar. I
In the
apologize, I
National
didn't.
Conference in Tempe in
Yes,
September.
in the conference in September. So look forward to seeing everyone there at future events. And like I said, you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. That went pretty well.
Good job. Ken exited before I could say good job.
Yeah, so recording to stop now.
Perfect.